In 1962, 17 coal miners rode the cage down into the Blackwater mine in Matewan, West Virginia, to start their morning shift. None of them ever came back up. The official story blamed everything on a massive methane blast that supposedly detonated deep underground, caving in 3 main tunnels and trapping the crew behind tons of rock. The company paid out quick settlements to the families. The mine was sealed, shut down for good, and Matewan folded the disaster into its local law and moved on. But half a century later, when the county sheriff was sorting through old records, he stumbled across something that didn't match the legend everyone knew. A reference to a sealed chamber far below ground level, one that showed no trace of any explosion. What he eventually uncovered in connection with that room would drag a 50-year-old case back into the light, put him on a collision course with people who'd spent decades burying it, and prove that the most dangerous secrets are often the ones closest to home. Sheriff Danny Morrison had been kicking the can on cleaning out the records room for 3 years, but the new digital filing system meant the paper archives finally had to be sorted, scanned, or tossed. It was slow, mind-numbing work he chipped away at after his regular shift, when the county building was half empty and quiet enough for him to think. The basement storage room reeked of dust and old paper, with cardboard boxes stacked from floor to ceiling, some of them stamped with dates going back to the 1940s. Most of it was the usual small-town clutter, property disputes, petty arrests, budget ledgers no one had opened in decades. But Danny was meticulous by nature, the sort of cop who read every page before deciding whether it lived or died. That's how he found the folder labeled Blackwater Mine Incident, 1962. The file was thick, jammed between a stack of faded traffic tickets and a box of courthouse maintenance logs. Danny had grown up hearing about Blackwater, 17 miners killed in an explosion, the worst tragedy in Matewan's history. His grandfather used to work the mines before switching to construction, always saying underground work was dangerous, but paid well for a man with limited choices. Danny slid the folder free and laid it open on the scarred wooden table he'd claimed as his station. The incident report itself was brittle with age, typed on a machine whose ribbon had been on its last legs even then. At the top, Mingo County Sheriff's Department. Below, a stamped date, April 23, 1962. Location, Blackwater Mine, Route 52, Matewan, West Virginia. Incident type, industrial accident, multiple fatalities. According to the report, at about 11:47 a.m., a methane gas explosion had ripped through the eastern section of the mine. 17 miners were underground at the time. All were presumed dead, the victim of collapses and impassable debris that thwarted any rescue attempts. Then came the part that made Danny's pulse slow and his skin go cold, a list of the victims. 17 names, 17 men who never came home, 17 families shattered in one late morning blast. But one entry froze him entirely. Morrison James Patrick, age 31, lead foreman. Morrison. His grandfather's name had been James Patrick Morrison. A heavy, icy feeling settled in Danny's gut. His grandfather died when Danny was 12, and the story had always been simple. Heart attack. No one in the family ever really talked about his mining days. Danny's father had always said his own dad worked construction, built houses, kept away from the dangerous shaft work. Yet here was that name in black and white, identifying James Patrick Morrison as the lead foreman on the crew killed in the Blackwater explosion. Danny rifled through the rest of the file, looking for anything that might explain the discrepancy. There were grainy black and white photos of the mine entrance, rescue gear scattered around, men in suits addressing reporters. But what snagged his eye was a handwritten note clipped to the back of the main report. Investigation incomplete. Recommend further inquiry into company safety protocols and event timeline. Several discrepancies noted in witness statements. Deputy R. Collins. Below it, in another hand, case closed by order of Sheriff Hawkins. No further investigation required. Danny stared at the 2 lines. Someone had pushed to dig deeper and had been shut down. Why would a sitting sheriff slam the door on an inquiry into 17 deaths? He kept working through the stack. The next document was a settlement agreement between Cumberland Coal Company and the victims' families. Each family received $5,000, a lot of money in 1962, but nowhere near enough to replace a husband and father. What bothered Danny wasn't just the amount. It was the speed. The explosion occurred on April 23rd. By May 15th, less than 3 weeks, all the settlement papers were signed, and the mine was marked as permanently sealed. Danny had handled enough industrial death cases to know they normally dragged on for months or years, especially when multiple fatalities were involved. Companies resisted payouts, insurers demanded exhaustive investigations, families retained lawyers and filed suits, but Blackwater had been wrapped up, legally speaking, in under a month. At the very bottom of the folder was a manila envelope stamped "Evidence Property of Cumberland Coal Company." Inside were what appeared to be geological survey reports, pages filled with technical diagrams and dense mineral analyses that made little sense to Danny. One phrase, however, kept jumping out at him: high-grade uranium ore deposits. Along with that, estimated value $2.3 million per ton. Danny leaned back in his chair, the scattered puzzle pieces abruptly aligning in his head. In 1962, uranium was essentially gold-laced with dynamite. The Cold War was in full swing, nuclear arsenals ballooning, uranium deposits treated as strategic assets. If Blackwater contained uranium worth millions per ton, the nature of the accident shifted completely. It stopped looking like a tragic mishap and started to resemble a highly motivated cover story for something far more valuable. His radio crackled to life, making him jump. "Sheriff Morrison, you copy?" He grabbed the mic. "Go ahead, dispatch." Got a call from the State Mining Inspector's office. They're asking to set up a meeting about some old mine safety records they need for a federal audit. You want me to book something? Danny looked down at the file spread across the table. His grandfather's name on the death list. The uranium surveys that had never seen the light of day. "Tell them I'll call them back," he said. "I need to check on something first." When he clipped the mic back in place, the decision was already made. He was going to drive out to the old Blackwater site and see what was left of the place where his grandfather had supposedly died 50 years earlier. Because nothing in this folder added up. And if Danny had learned anything in 15 years wearing a badge, it was that when official narratives moved too quickly and wrapped up too cleanly, there was almost always something ugly hiding underneath. He gathered the documents, locked them in his truck, and pulled out onto Route 52. Blackwater was only about 20 minutes from town, but Danny had never bothered to visit. There had never been a reason to stand in front of a 50-year-old tomb. As his cruiser twisted through the mountain roads, though, he couldn't shake the growing suspicion that he was about to learn his grandfather's death had never happened the way his family claimed, and that 17 other families might have been fed the same lie. The old access road to Blackwater had been neglected nearly as long as the mine itself. Danny's patrol car bucked over potholes and fractured asphalt, where weeds pushed through like green fingers, prying apart old scars. The rusted gate at the entrance sagged open on corroded hinges, still bearing a cracked sign: Cumberland Coal Company, authorized personnel only. Someone had later sprayed "Danger, keep out" across it in red paint that had streaked downward, dried in ragged runs like old blood. Danny parked by the gate and stepped into the quiet, thin mountain air. The smell of pine and ancient coal dust mingled with a damp, earthy chill that seemed to seep from underground. Half a century of weathering had softened the industrial footprint, but the skeletal remains of the operation were still there. Concrete pads where buildings had stood, rusted rails that once carried coal cars, and at the far end of the site, the black throat of the shaft, walled off by concrete and steel. He crunched up the gravel drive, his boots grinding coal chips and stone. The deeper he walked into the complex, the more wrong the place felt. Danny had seen other shuttered mines, closed when coal prices dropped or regulations tightened. Those operations always looked like what they were: sites that had simply been walked away from, equipment abandoned mid-task, structures slowly stripped of scrap, nature reclaiming everything in a gradual slide. Blackwater felt different. It looked like the plug had been pulled in a panic. Near the ruin of what used to be the main office, Danny found paperwork scattered in the dirt, half buried under decades of leaves. Most of it was destroyed, but he could make out fragments of timesheets, safety logs, personnel lists, the sort of records companies usually lock up or destroy when they close shop. Closer to the sealed shaft, he studied the barrier itself. The wall of concrete and steel reinforcing ribs looked massively overbuilt for a routine closure. This wasn't just a safety plug. It was a fortress. Whoever had ordered this wanted to make absolutely sure nothing and no one went either in or out again. He walked the circumference of the seal, examining the construction. The concrete had been poured thick, and steel beams were welded across the opening in a crisscross pattern. What really got his attention, though, were the dates stamped into the concrete near the ground: APR 24, 1962 and APR 25, 1962. April 24th and 25th, the day after the reported explosion, and the day after that. Danny frowned. The file back at the office described rescue operations stretching on for days as crews fought to reach trapped miners. But if they'd started pouring concrete within 24 hours of the blast, how had they conducted any legitimate search at all? He pulled out his phone and snapped photos of the date stamps, the heavy reinforcing, the debris of paperwork near the offices. Then he walked back toward his cruiser, mentally stacking questions now forming into a solid wall. Why was the mine sealed so quickly? Why had the sheriff's office been ordered to walk away from a massive loss of life? Why had his family lied about his grandfather's death? And looming over all of it, what was so valuable down there that someone might have been willing to kill 17 men? He was halfway back to the car when he saw the figure in the tree line. A man stood maybe 60 yards away, half obscured by pines, tall, wiry in work clothes and a baseball cap pulled low. When Danny raised a hand in greeting, the man stepped back, slipping farther into the shadows. "Hey," Danny called. "You need something?" No answer. The man retreated into the woods until he vanished. Danny's hand drifted instinctively toward the holster at his hip. 15 years on the job had tuned his instincts. The way the stranger watched, still patient like someone trained to stay unseen, set every alarm off. Danny lengthened his stride, keeping his eyes on the tree line until he slid into the driver's seat and fired up the engine. His radio crackled. "Sheriff Morrison, you there?" "Go ahead," Danny said. "We just got a call from a guy claiming he's with the state mining inspector's office. Wanted to know if you were out checking old mine sites today." Danny felt his chest tighten. "He leave a name?" "Said his name was Henderson. When I asked for a callback number, he said he'd ring back later and hung up." Danny glanced at the place where the stranger had been watching. No legitimate state inspector would be skulking in the trees at an abandoned site. And how exactly had anyone known where he was? "Copy," Danny said. "I'm heading back to the office." As he pulled onto the road and left Blackwater behind him, the feeling burned in his gut. His quick visit had tripped a wire. Somebody was watching this place. Somebody who didn't want the law sniffing around a mining accident from 1962. Back at the station, Danny spread the Blackwater file across his desk and started dialing. First up, the West Virginia Department of Mining Safety, Records Division, the receptionist said after transferring him. "What can I help you with?" "I'm looking for historical records on a mine," Danny said. "Blackwater Mine in Matewan. Incident in 1962. Blackwater Mine," the woman repeated, her voice thoughtful. "That does ring a bell. What year did you say?" 1962. Explosion killed 17 miners, according to our report. "Hold on, let me check our database." He listened to her type for a moment. "That's strange. I'm not seeing any incident report for a Blackwater mine in 1962. Are you sure about the name and date?" Danny looked at the file spread out in front of him. "I'm holding the county incident report right now. Methane explosion on April 23, 1962. 17 miners killed." "Sir, I've been maintaining these records for 30 years, she said. "We have documentation for every coal fatality going back to the 1920s. If 17 miners died in one incident in 62, I'd have a file. But there's nothing. Nothing at all? According to our system, no mining accident in Mingo County that year involving multiple deaths." A chill crawled up Danny's spine. "What about Cumberland Coal Company?" he asked. "Any records of them operating near Matewan?" More typing. "I show Cumberland operating several mines in southern West Virginia in the 60s, yes. But this is odd. Their Matewan site is listed as closed on April 22, 1962. That's one day before your incident date. They shut the mine down the day before the explosion?" "That's what it says. Closure reason listed as administrative, no explanation." Danny thanked her and hung up, his thoughts spinning. The state had no record of the explosion at all. Cumberland had officially closed the mine the day before the supposed accident, and someone was still physically watching the site 50 years later. He picked up the phone again and dialed his father. "Dad, I need to ask you something about Grandpa," he said when his father picked up. Silence on the other end. "What about him? How did he really die?" Another pause, heavier this time. "Danny, why are you asking that now?" "Because I'm looking at a file that says he died in a mine explosion in 1962 with 16 other men. But I grew up being told he had a heart attack." His father's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Where did you get that file?" "County Archives." "Dad, what actually happened to him?" "Son," his father said quietly, "some things are better left buried. Your grandfather wouldn't want you stirring this up. 17 men died, Dad. 17 families were lied to. If Grandpa was one of them—" "Danny," his father cut in sharply, "drop it. Some stones don't need turning over." Then he hung up. Danny sat with the phone in his hand, his father's warning echoing in the small office. But with his grandfather's name staring up from the list, the uranium surveys tucked in the evidence envelope, and the photos of that hastily sealed shaft in his mind, he knew he wasn't walking away. 17 men had gone down there. Their families had taken money and silence, and half a century later, somebody was still guarding the secret. Danny Morrison intended to find out why. He spent the rest of the afternoon trying to track down the families of the other 16 men listed in the report. The surnames were familiar, names he'd seen on mailboxes, heard at council meetings, families that had been part of Matawan for generations. But when he started making calls, he ran into the same pattern again and again. The Hendersons? They moved out years back, right after old Bill died, I think. The Caldwells. Haven't seen any local in decades. Heard they went north. Bobby Garrett's people used to live on Elm, but that house has been empty as long as I can remember. By 5 o'clock, Danny had made 23 calls and hadn't found a single living relative still in town from the victim list. In a community where family roots went back 100 years and everybody knew everybody's business, it was as if every family tied to the worst mining disaster in local memory had simply evaporated. That didn't just feel odd, it felt impossible. Danny locked the file in his desk and went home, but leaving the building didn't shake the obsession loose. His small house on the outskirts of town was usually a place where he could think clearly. Tonight he barely tasted his dinner, instead grabbing a beer and his laptop and settling on the back porch to dig deeper. Using online records and databases, he started pulling up property transactions, tax records, and address histories tied to the victim families. What he uncovered was unsettling. Within 6 months of the Blackwater incident, 6 of the 17 families had sold their homes and moved out of state. 3 more had relocated within West Virginia, but to counties far from Matawan. The remaining 8 family lines simply fell off the map. No forwarding addresses, no death notices, no obvious paper trail of any kind. Danny had worked enough missing persons cases to know that people always left some record behind. A paycheck, hospital visit, driver's license renewal. Entire families didn't just vanish without a ripple, yet the Blackwater families had been wiped from the record almost as thoroughly as their loved ones had been wiped from the mine. His phone rang, snapping him out of his search. The number was unfamiliar. "Sheriff Morrison," he answered. "That you?" An old man's voice asked. "Yes, sir."
"Who's this?"
"Name's Carl Hutchkins. I heard you've been asking about the old mine incident." Danny straightened in his chair. "Who told you that?" The man chuckled without humor. "In a small town, word don't have far to travel. I was wondering if we could talk. There's things you need to know before you dig too deep." "What kind of things?" "The kind that got good men hurt in 62. The kind that can still get people hurt." "Is that a threat, Mr. Hutchkins?" "No, Sheriff. That's a warning. There's a difference." "Where do you want to meet?" "You know that old diner on 119, about 10 miles north? I'll be there at 8. Come alone. Don't tell nobody where you're headed." The call ended before Danny could argue. Every instinct screamed that this was a bad idea. Meeting an unknown source in a deserted place at night was exactly how cops got ambushed. But the man claimed to have answers about Blackwater, and Danny's need for the truth outweighed his sense of self-preservation. He strapped on his sidearm, grabbed his keys, and drove into the dark. The diner on Route 119 had been closed for years, but someone had left the parking lot lights on, bathing cracked pavement in pale yellow pools. Danny arrived early and circled the lot on foot, scanning for backup vehicles, unusual shapes, anything that looked like a setup. The only vehicle in sight was a lone pickup close to the entrance. Right at 8, a figure emerged from the shadows near the building. He looked to be in his 70s, white hair, a lean face creased by years of outdoor labor. His movements were careful and stiff, but his eyes were sharp. "Sheriff Morrison?" he asked. "Mr. Hutchkins," Danny replied. They shook hands. The old man's grip was still iron. "Appreciate you coming out," Hutchkins said. "I wasn't sure you would. You said you had information about 1962. Hutchkins nodded toward a weathered picnic table at the edge of the lot. "Let's sit. This ain't a short story." They sat across from each other. Hutchkins pulled a dented thermos from his coat. "Coffee?" "I'm fine. Start with April 23rd, 1962. Hutchkins unscrewed the lid, poured himself a cup, and took a long drink before speaking. "I was 22. Worked that mine for 3 years, usually on day shift, but that morning I called in sick." Danny's heart rate kicked up. "You were supposed to be on that crew?" "Should have been," Hutchkins said. "Your granddad, James Morrison, was my shift boss. Fair man, tough but fair. If I hadn't been hugging the toilet that morning, I'd be in that mine with the rest of them." "So you believe there was an explosion?" Danny asked. Hutchkins gave a humorless laugh. "Sheriff, there weren't no explosion." The words hung between them in the cool night air. "What do you mean?" "I mean those 17 men didn't die in some gas blast. They were executed, shot down in the tunnels, and then buried behind concrete so nobody could ever see what really happened." Danny's mouth went dry. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I saw it," Hutchkins said quietly. "I may have called in sick, but I felt guilty leaving the crew short. Around noon I rode out there to see if they needed me for the second half of the day." His hand trembled slightly as he refilled his cup. "When I pulled up, I heard gunfire echoing from underground. Not 1 or 2 pops either. It sounded like a war down there." "What did you do?" "I hid behind one of the sheds and waited. 20 minutes later, men started coming up out of the shaft. Not miners. Men in suits carrying rifles. And behind them came more men in work clothes, but they weren't Cumberland boys, strangers. Contractor types, maybe." "How many?" Danny asked, taking out his notebook. 8, 10, maybe more. They spent a couple hours hauling equipment, boxes, stacks of files, loading it all into unmarked trucks. "Recognize anyone?" 2, Hutchkins said grimly. "Harold Vance, Cumberland's site supervisor, and Sheriff Hawkins. Both armed. Both giving orders like they owned the place." Ice slid along Danny's spine. The sheriff had not just closed the case. He'd been on scene, armed, orchestrating whatever had happened. "I saw Hawkins personally watch over the concrete trucks," Hutchkins went on. 6, 7 loads. Way more than you'd ever need just to plug a shaft. "Why didn't you say anything?" Danny asked. "Report it to someone?" "To who?" Hutchkins snorted. "Hawkins ran the department. Vance owned half the commission. And you got to remember, this was 62, Cold War paranoia. Government had secret projects everywhere. Folks who asked the wrong questions sometimes just stopped being around. So why tell me now?" Danny asked. "Because I'm 73, Hutchkins said simply. "Been carrying this for 50 years. Those men had families. They deserve truth. And because," he faltered. "Because what?" "Because they're still out there," Hutchkins said. "Not the same faces, maybe, but the same agencies, the same money. And if you keep poking this, they'll come after you like they did everyone else who got too close." "You're accusing federal agencies of mass murder and a cover-up," Danny said carefully. "That's exactly what I'm doing. Why should I trust you?" Instead of answering, Hutchkins fished something from his pocket and set it on the table. A tarnished brass shell casing. The markings were still visible. 3006 military issue. "Picked that up outside the shaft that day," he said. "Figured someday someone might need proof those men were shot, not blown up." Danny turned the casing between his fingers. "Government ammunition. There's more," Hutchkins said, pulling out a folded yellowed paper. "Grab this from a box one of those suits was loading." It was a geological survey. Technical language filled the page, but one section was circled in red. High-grade uranium ore. Concentration, 2.7% by weight. Estimated reserves 47,000 tons. Current market value 127 million. Danny let out a low breath. 127 million in 1962 dollars. Worth 10 times that now at least, Hutchkins said. And that's just the uranium. There were other weird metals down there. Rare earth stuff. Government weapons boys were real interested. Danny folded the paper and slid it and the casing into his jacket. You sat on this for 50 years, he said. Why not come forward? Because they made examples, Hutchkins said flatly. 3 months after the mine, that deputy, Collins, the one who wrote the note about continuing the investigation, died in a car wreck on a straight road he'd driven 1,000 times. 6 months later, a young reporter out of Charleston started asking questions about Blackwater. Dead of a heart attack at 31. A year after that, Vance's secretary vanished after someone saw her photocopying company files. Danny felt a wave of nausea. They'd been killing people over this for 50 years. Anyone who pushed too close, Hutchkins said. Sheriff, I'm telling you because those boys deserve justice. But I'm also telling you you're painting a target on your back. Headlights washed over the lot as a dark sedan rolled in, gliding to a stop about 50 yards away. The engine stayed running. No one got out. Time for me to disappear, Hutchkins said, standing. Be careful who you trust. This thing goes higher than you think. How do I reach you? Danny asked, but the old man was already heading for his truck. You don't, Hutchkins said, climbing in. After tonight, far as anyone's concerned, Carl Hutchkins don't exist. His taillights vanished down the highway, leaving Danny alone with the shell casing, the survey, and the sedan. The driver's door opened and a man in a suit stepped out. Mid-40s, clean-cut, moving with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in authority. Sheriff Morrison, he called. Mind if we talk? The man walked over, hands visible, not quite relaxed. Agent James Crawford, he said, flipping open a badge. FBI. Danny kept his hand near his weapon. It depends what you want to talk about. About why revisiting a 50-year-old mining incident might not be in your best interest, Crawford said smoothly. Or your town's. Sounds like a threat, Agent, Danny said. Crawford smiled without warmth. Practical advice. He nodded toward the picnic table. Sit. Against his instincts, Danny sat. Crawford produced a slim folder from inside his jacket. I'm going to give you some context, he said. Blackwater was part of a federal operation tied to national security. Cold War stuff. Our nuclear program, classified. Uranium, Danny said. Crawford nodded once. The mine wasn't just pulling coal. The government discovered high-value ore deposits. When civilians stumbled onto something that sensitive, we had to act. Act how? Danny asked. By killing 17 miners. By containing a security breach, Crawford said. He opened the folder to show a document with heavy black bars. They weren't victims of an accident. They were personnel exposed to classified information. Containment was authorized. Some were relocated under new identities, with generous compensation. Others were less cooperative. Danny's jaw clenched. My grandfather. James Morrison refused relocation, Crawford said blandly. He insisted on staying in town, threatened to go public. He was given multiple chances to comply. He met Danny's eyes. Your grandfather was a patriot, but stubborn. His death prevented a strategic asset from falling into the wrong hands. You murdered him, Danny said quietly, and 16 others. Contractors executed a lawful operation under federal authority, Crawford replied. During the Cold War, we made tough calls. The uranium from Blackwater went into weapons that deterred our enemies for decades. Danny stood abruptly. You're justifying mass murder. Crawford rose too, still calm. I'm pointing out reality, and I'm here to offer you the same choice your grandfather had. Walk away? Danny asked. Exactly, Crawford said. Drop this. Your parents, your town, your career, they all stay intact. Or keep pushing and accidents happen. Mines collapse. People vanish. Danny's hand tightened on his holster. That a promise? It's an observation, Crawford said. The decision's yours. You've got 24 hours to make it. He turned away, then glanced back. Oh, and as of tonight, Mr. Hutchkins is unavailable. He's elected to relocate. The sedan pulled out, leaving Danny alone with the weight of a conspiracy and the knowledge that he was now on someone's list. At home, he spread everything on the kitchen table, the county report with his grandfather's name, the hidden uranium surveys, the shell casing, the photos of that rushed concrete seal. The evidence screamed murder and cover-up. Crawford's threats made one thing clear. Digging further might get him killed. His phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed his father. "You all right?" his father asked immediately. "Two men in suits just left the house. Said they worked with you. Wanted to know if you told us anything about an old mine case." "What did you tell them?" Danny asked. "That you hadn't," his father said. "Which is true, but Danny, they knew things. About your grandfather, about us. Your mother's maiden name. Where she worked before we married. It felt like they were letting us know how much they could hurt us if they wanted to. Dad," Danny said, "I need you and Mum to pack a bag and go to Aunt Sarah's in Charleston. Tonight, don't tell anyone." "Son, what have you stepped into?" his father asked. "I found out how Grandpa really died," Danny said. "And now the people who did it are spooking anyone who might help me expose them." His father went quiet. "Your grandfather tried the same thing," he said finally. "Tried to do the right thing. It got him killed. Don't repeat his mistake. Maybe it's time someone finished what he started," Danny said. "Think about your family," his father pleaded. "Your town. Is dredging up something from 62 worth all that?" Danny looked at his table, at the lettered name, at the shell casing. "Yes," he said. "It is." After he hung up, he made two choices. He was going to get inside Blackwater, and he was going to find out if any of the miners Agent Crawford claimed had been relocated were still alive. Because Crawford had let one thing slip, that some men had accepted new identities. If that was true, there might still be witnesses. But first, his parents needed to be out of the blast radius. Danny drove to his childhood home, where his mother answered the door with fear etched across her face, and his father hovered behind her. They argued about the danger, about his grandfather's stubbornness, about the Henderson family whose house had mysteriously burned down after the widow refused to sign a settlement. In the end, his father relented. "You're just like him," he said, half proud, half terrified. "We'll go tonight, but if you disappear, we'll know why." As Danny walked back to his truck, a sedan with tinted windows idled down the street, its engine humming. As soon as he pulled away, the car followed. Good, he thought. Let them track me instead of my parents. He led them back into town, circling aimlessly to buy his parents time to escape, then parked under the bright lights of the sheriff's office. The sedan stayed at a distance, watching. Inside, he opened his desk drawer and immediately knew someone had been there. The files were slightly rearranged. A faint trace of unfamiliar cologne hung in the air. Someone had gone through his desk. Danny grabbed the files and his laptop and slipped out the back, heading for his patrol car instead of the unit they expected him to take. One more place he needed to go before they tightened the net. His great-aunt Ruth's house, his grandfather's sister. Her address had taken some digging through property records, but he finally tracked it down. A cluttered, aging home near the industrial part of town. Ruth answered in a housecoat, hair in curlers, eyes narrowing behind thick glasses. "Danny? What on earth are you doing here this late?" "I need to ask about Grandpa James," he said. The name alone changed her expression. Wariness replaced surprise. "What about him?" "I know about Blackwater," Danny said. "The uranium. The men that died. The cover-up. And I know he didn't die of a heart attack." Ruth glanced past him, checking the street, then pulled him quickly inside and locked the door. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "They've been keeping tabs on this family for 50 years. If they see you here—" "Who?" Danny asked. "Same people who came after James," she said. She led him into a cramped kitchen and put on coffee, her hands trembling. "There are things your father never knew. Things your grandfather told me the night before he disappeared." "What things?" Danny asked. Ruth sat opposite him. He wasn't just refusing their money. He was building a record. He knew something was wrong. He hid proof, samples, photos, copies of those surveys. "He told me if anything happened, there was a key I was to keep until someone in the family was ready to use it." She walked to an old grandfather clock in the corner, opened the case and reached behind the pendulum. A small brass key taped to the wood. She pressed it into his hand. The number 247 was etched into the metal. "He said there was a safety deposit box at First National Bank in Logan County," she said. Under a false name. Everything he documented is in there. What name? Patrick Morrison, she said. His middle name and our maiden name. She squeezed his hand. If what's in that box is as bad as he believed, they'll kill to keep it quiet. Like they killed him, Danny nodded. Then we have to get to it before they do. Ruth peeked through the curtains. Another sedan sat under the streetlight now, engine running. They found you, she said. Then they'll be watching the bank tomorrow, Danny replied. So I'll just have to get there smarter and faster than they do. He kissed her cheek, told her to deny he'd ever been there, and slipped out the back, cutting through yards to reach his parked car 3 blocks away. The next morning, he arrived in Logan early and watched First National from a distance. At 8:45, he saw 2 suited men walk inside. Their body language screamed federal. Crawford's people had beaten him to it. At 9 o'clock sharp, Danny stepped into the bank. The 2 agents were at the manager's desk, showing credentials. A teller greeted him. I need access to a safety deposit box, Danny said, placing the key on the counter. Number 247. Name's Patrick Morrison. The teller blinked, glancing nervously toward the suits. I think you'll have to speak to Mr. Patterson, our manager. He's dealing with something involving the boxes right now. This is an active homicide investigation, Danny said, showing his badge. I have court authority to access that box immediately. It was a bluff, but he pitched his voice so the agents across the lobby would hear. They turned and recognized him at once. One strode over, hand resting near his jacket holster. Sheriff Morrison, he said. Agent Crawford sent us to assist. Funny, Danny said. He told me to walk away. Plans changed, the agent said smoothly. We're here to secure evidence. Then you won't mind if I open the box first and review the contents before sharing, Danny replied. Actually, we will, the agent said. Materials inside are classified. Federal protocol requires we handle them. The manager hurried over, clearly rattled. Gentlemen, perhaps we can discuss this upstairs. No, Danny cut in, raising his voice. I'm opening that box now as part of a criminal investigation into 17 deaths. He turned to the manager. Mr. Patterson, you planning to let federal agents intimidate you into violating a customer's legal rights? The lobby went quiet. Customers stared. The teller's hand drifted under her counter, probably toward a panic button. The second agent stepped to Danny's side, angling to control his escape. Sheriff, come with us, the first agent said. We need to speak privately. Danny's hand eased toward his gun. The only place I'm going is downstairs. And if you try to stop me, I'll arrest you for obstructing a homicide investigation. On what authority? The agent scoffed. On the authority of 17 dead miners whose families were lied to, Danny shot back. The manager looked like he might faint. I really should call our legal department, he stammered. No time, the agent said, pulling out his phone. Initiate building lockdown, he said quietly. The front doors thunked as they locked. Outside, more agents took positions. Sheriff, you're now under federal detention for interfering in a national security operation, the agent announced. You'll be released when we've secured the materials. Like hell, Danny said. He drew his weapon. Everybody down! This is Sheriff Morrison. These men are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction. Chaos detonated. Customers screamed and hit the floor. The agents drew their own weapons. You're making a big mistake, one hissed. The mistake, Danny shouted, backing toward the stairs, was made in 1962. He jerked his head at Patterson. You're coming with me. You're a witness to what we find. I can't, the manager stammered. So you can, Danny said, because in 5 minutes this is going to be all over the news, and you're going to want to be on the right side of it. He hustled Patterson down to the vault, where the agents were regrouping and likely calling in reinforcements. Inside the stark rows of safety deposit boxes, Danny jammed the key into box 247 and turned. It slid free with a soft scrape. The box was heavier than he expected. They set it on a central table, both shaking. Document everything, Danny told Patterson. Photos, notes. If I don't make it out, this goes public. Patterson raised his phone and started recording. Danny lifted the lid. On top of stacks of papers and photos and small cloth bags lay a single envelope. To whoever finds this, in his grandfather's hand. Danny opened it and read aloud. The letter laid everything out. James Morrison's role as lead foreman, The sudden arrival of government scientists, the discovery of rare earth elements in concentrations no one understood, the relocation offers, the panic when they realized miners had taken samples home, the fear when outside geologists were consulted. Morrison described how he started quietly copying surveys, hiding core samples, photographing equipment, and tape-recording conversations. He named names, noted dates, and detailed how containment would be carried out. A staged methane explosion, followed by the elimination of all witnesses. "Everything's in this box," his grandfather wrote. Proof the explosion was a lie. Proof those men were executed. Proof this wasn't about coal or even uranium alone, but about rare earth metals worth billions that they didn't want to share with the people whose lives they took. James closed by asking whoever found the letter, especially if it was his family, to use the evidence for justice, to expose the conspiracy, to ensure no other community suffered what theirs had.